So welcome everybody. This is Flashstarts, Bitcoin for Business webinar. My name's Charles Stack. Shannon Lyons is with us as well. She'll be moderating the chat window. If anybody has any issues or technical questions or topical questions, please put them in the chat and she'll pass them along to me as appropriate. So let's get started. So I originally scheduled this webinar for today because today was supposed to be the Bitcoin Halving Day, which is the day that the miner rewards are cut in half. And historically, which is a funny sentence considering Bitcoin's only 11 years old, but the last two times it happened, the price of Bitcoin went up afterwards. So everybody was excited about it, but it ended up happening yesterday. And the price has moved up and down, but not significantly. But happy halving day. And that's hard to say. So what we're going to do in the next half hour is go through Bitcoin as it pertains to business and the different use cases for businesses. So first, I'll talk a little bit about businesses adopting emerging technology, review some Bitcoin basics, which will be very high level and not nearly enough for people to really understand it, but should give you a good starting point. And if you have questions on that, we'll pause after that where I can explain the stuff I didn't explain well the first time. And then I think the biggest thing is increasing acceptance. Bitcoin has increasingly been accepted as a legitimate store of value, currency, and unit of account. Those are the three roles. And I'll give specific examples of that acceptance and how it's played out. Then I'll talk about some of the pieces that make up the Bitcoin ecosystem, which are Bitcoin servers, wallets, and exchanges. And I'll make some specific recommendations there. And then the benefits of Bitcoin to business will be the next topic we'll touch on. Some business models that are enabled by Bitcoin. Case studies. There are not too many formal case studies. A lot of it's anecdotal. A lot of it's reading between the lines, but I will present those that I've been able to locate. Pilot projects and best practices, how your business can get started today, climbing the learning curve. And then next steps. So you, again, use the chat to ask questions. And Flashstarts has a concept called levels of technology adoption, or FLOTA. And this is important because we focus on emerging technologies, and emerging technologies go through a series of steps as they get adopted, from unengaged to strategic value. And just a brief explanation of this: unengaged is where you don't really know about it, you're not paying attention to it, and those are before they actually come up over the horizon. Tracking a technology, you may see an emerging technology that could be of interest, and then you start to track it. Maybe someone within your organization goes to a seminar or pays attention to news and notes. And then level 2 is educational, where you actually allocate a budget to helping people within your organization learn more about that emerging technology. The third stage is experimental, where you do some low risk pilot projects to learn more, to see where it may or may not be applicable to your business. Level 4 is tactical, where the particular emerging technology can provide some tactical benefits to your organization. And then finally, strategic, where it really becomes part of your sustainable competitive advantage. And not all technologies will pass through all levels. It may turn out that a particular technology will never be strategic or even tactical for you, but you should at least go through the first three. Track it, learn about it, and experiment with it before deciding whether it may or may not be tactical. So Bitcoin, for most organizations and for the purposes of this presentation, sits in the between 2 and 3. It's educational and experimental. So if you really take just one thing away from this presentation, is Now's the right time to start learning about Bitcoin for your business and to maybe consider experimenting with some early pilot projects. And that's the focus of the presentation. I hope that will help you. This is the shortest introduction to Bitcoin you'll ever see. Definition: Bitcoin is a shared public ledger of transactions. We'll come back. We'll weave that in and out as we proceed here. There are several components that make up Bitcoin. They're not Bitcoin, but they are parts of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is based on blockchain technologies, just like Ethereum is based on blockchain technologies, but they're not the same thing. Bitcoins themselves are created through a process called mining, which is a very high-end algorithm that is solved by very specific and expensive computers that create the coins themselves using a concept called proof of work. We won't spend a lot of time on that because there's really not, unless that is your business, there's really not much value to your business, most businesses. And then cryptography is the next key component of Bitcoin, being able to secure things with cryptographic signatures and so forth. There's 4 moving parts within the Bitcoin ecosystem. There's miners, servers, wallets, and exchanges. And we will talk about servers, wallets, and exchanges on a later slide. So Bitcoin really serves 3 different purposes. It can be and is used as a currency. It can be used as a store of value, and it can be used as a unit of account. And all 3 of those can play into your use as a business. And we will talk about all 3 of those throughout. The hardest concept is the myth of fiat currencies. Most people take the US dollar and our current currencies for granted, but if you spend time looking into the history of currencies, we have a humorous video I'll show at the end where the invention of gold in 300 BC or something is very funny. But the fiat was originally based on gold, or national currencies were for the most part based on gold. That went away in 72 by and large. And now fiat currencies are just based on the trust you have in a particular government. And the trust concept is important because if you play in the Bitcoin space, you're replacing trust in government with trust in a set of algorithms. And that's really the big difference between the US dollar or the British pound and Bitcoin is what or who you trust in order to believe that that will serve as a currency, a store of value, and a unit of account. One of the key points that isn't often mentioned is that Bitcoin is both open and open source. And that's extremely important for you as a business because it means that you can look at the code that runs Bitcoin and understand how it works. You can program with it or on top of it because it's open source software. And that is what presents some of the most interesting opportunities for businesses going forward. So the benefits. Bitcoin is private but not anonymous. Your wallet ID and transactions with your wallet ID are embedded in the database that makes up Bitcoin. There's a fascinating company called Glassnode that tracks a wide array of information based on the public but private, the public transactions that occur on the Bitcoin chain. It's fast. It's transactions close generally in 10 minutes or less, and most importantly, and often overlooked, it's open 24 by 7 by 365, unlike the rest of the world's banking infrastructure. And the cost of a Bitcoin transaction, it does vary. There's a little bit of the Uber surge pricing built in. It has gone up into the tens of dollars on occasion, also down into the tens of cents, but it's been around $1 for the most part per transaction. It's final. There's no such concept of chargebacks. It's disinflationary. It may serve as an inflation hedge. And let me just play a really quick video here. Paul Tudor Jones, who is a hedge fund manager, has put 1% of his hedge fund.
Welcome back to Fast Money. One of Wall Street's most successful hedge fund managers sending a giant shockwave across the cryptocurrency market today. Paul Tudor Jones reportedly buying Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation. Jones comparing cryptocurrency to the gold trade back in the 1970s, calling it the fastest horse in this environment. Let's break this bombshell down with our own Bitcoin baller, Brian Kelly.
So that was a big deal. That was about a week ago, and the that resonated through Wall Street because he's a really big figure. So that's in the store value category, using Bitcoin as an alternative to gold, and that's the disinflationary aspect of it, or serving as a hedge against inflation. Transnational, this is probably one of the more important business benefits. It allows you to send currency around the world without intermediaries, and a lot of the early use cases have been based on that feature. And then finally, and to me by far the most interesting one, is it's programmable because it is open and open source. You can actually use currency as a building block for new features, new products, new services, and that's where things can get really interesting. It's increasingly legitimate. Bloomberg has just started issuing monthly reports, and this is again based on the store of value aspect of it. It's a digital version of gold, and in the file section, there is. I will show you this. If you want to download the files, you can download the Bloomberg Bitcoin April 2020. It should be on the right-hand side to share. This is a quote from it, and they now release a monthly report about Bitcoin as an investment. It's also increasingly adopted. This is a graph from the web service I mentioned called Glassnode. And the black line is the price. You can see that going up and down, although the general trend has been up. But more importantly for this purpose, the gold line goes up and to the right with very few blips. And that's the number of Bitcoin addresses that hold more than one Bitcoin, so $9,000 or so today. There's over 800,000 Bitcoin addresses with more than one Bitcoin in them. That has been increasing almost nonstop since the very beginning. And I think that bodes well for increasing adoption, not just for Bitcoin as a store of value, but also Bitcoin as a currency and a unit of account. So we'll talk about the pieces now, the servers and wallets and exchanges. There are the server is just a piece of software that runs on Linux or Windows, or I think there's a Mac version, and it's pretty simple software. It doesn't require a fast CPU or anything. It does require a fair amount of disk space because there's a database involved. There are about 10,000 nodes worldwide, and this map shows you where they are throughout the world, largely in Europe and the US. And those servers serve to enforce the Bitcoin rules, as well as to keep duplicate copies of the transaction database themselves, much like DNS, which is the domain name server that the web uses to equate English languages to IP addresses. And the Bitcoin server software is open source, so anyone can install it. It's free. Flashstarts runs one. We've set up half a dozen of them. It's pretty straightforward. It takes minutes to set it up and then hours to download the whole database. But once you get it up and running, it's pretty low effort and it's got some interesting benefits. Lightning is one of the most important developments. It's another server that sits on top of the Bitcoin server. It's relatively new. It's still in beta, but what it does is provide extremely fast connections and the ability to send money, Bitcoin, small amounts generally, in less than a second, and it's free. So what the Lightning Network enables is microtransactions. So, it may cost $1 to send a bunch of Bitcoin from here to there. It virtually costs nothing to send Bitcoin over the Lightning Network. And this opens up a whole new range of business models that are worth exploring. Business to consumer sales for low-end transactions, you can start taking payments, sub dollar, sub $10, and not pay Visa MasterCard fees and settle instantly. It's a very interesting new technology, and we usually recommend it to all of our clients to not just install a Bitcoin server, but also to install a Lightning server. There's all sorts of new business models, particularly IoT. So if you have an Internet of Things and you have an IoT device that either consumes or creates data, you could use the Lightning Network to create a payment channel to both buy and sell that data with fractions and fractions of a penny per data item. And that's an entirely new model, and we're seeing a lot of development in that space. So it is significantly faster, cheaper, and easier than Visa MasterCard networks. And we think over time that the Lightning will start to challenge those networks because it's already cheaper and already faster. It just needs to get broader deployment. Wallets are the third piece of the technology bundle. There's really only the one Bitcoin server. There are some secondary ones, but they're not worth talking about. And there are two Lightning networks, but there's a bunch of wallets, and they come in different flavors. The wallet, most importantly, stores your cryptographic keys. It doesn't really store coins. They're really, it's a bit of a misnomer. There really are no such thing as coins. They're just transactions. And the wallets contain your key that is used to track transactions on the ledger itself. And they fall into different categories. There's hot wallets, which are those that are online, and cold wallets, which are physical devices, much like a USB drive, that are offline and safe and secure from poaching of any kind. In the hot wallet space, they can be both desktop wallets, mobile wallets, and custodial wallets that are held by an exchange. More about that in a second. So that's the world of wallets. The third leg of this triumvirate are exchanges and processors. So one of the things that we recommend that any business get in their first levels of adoption is a fiat on and off ramp. That's how you first purchase Bitcoin with US dollars or your international currency of choice. The top two in the US are probably Coinbase and Binance. So one of the first pilots you should engage in is to get an account at Coinbase or Binance. They both offer corporate accounts. We used to be at Coinbase, but for some variety of reasons, we recently switched to Binance. Frankly, their infrastructure seems to be more reliable. Coinbase has gone down a couple times in the last year, and there's nothing worse than not being able to access your exchange. So we kind of recommend Binance. BitPay is a little bit different. If your CEO comes to you and says, we need to accept Bitcoin, and you say how quickly, and he says or she says today, BitPay is your answer. I don't think it helps you get up the learning curve very much, and it's not something we'd recommend to most of our clients. It's a service that is the easiest possible way to engage and accept Bitcoin as payment. Binance, excuse me, Binance DEX I mentioned because it's a very interesting technology. It is Bitcoin based on a blockchain. So there's no centralized location. Coinbase and Binance actually have central servers. They store your keys and enable you to transact on that service. Binance DEX is totally distributed, and there is no central location. It uses blockchain to initiate buys and sells on a person-to-person, peer-to-peer level, and it's a very interesting technology. So, questions? I'll flip to the chat room. Does anybody have any questions about the technology? I know that was pretty quick. Shannon, you want to come on and let me know if we have any questions while I sip some tea?
Yeah, no questions as of yet.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I think it might be good to talk through the kind of getting a wallet and what people expect. How long would it take to set up a wallet? Could they do it by the end of the day? And I know you said there's a few options out there. What we've used or what we find really helpful.
Yeah, I've done a whole webinar on wallets because it is the primary touch point for all consumers and really for most businesses. We did one at the Blockland Solutions Conference, a whole presentation on wallets. And the one we recommended there was the Blue Wallet. And the reason for that is there's dozens of different wallets. We picked the Blue Wallet because it had native support for the Lightning Network. And as you can tell already, that I'm a big fan of Lightning and its future potential. So we recommend generally the Blue Wallet, which allows you to transact, send Bitcoin to other addresses, receive Bitcoin in your wallet, as well as to send really small amounts for free over the Lightning Network. So that's the wallet we generally recommend.
And I went ahead and put the link for Blue Wallet. We actually had another question come in. So check out that link for Blue Wallet. The concerns with volatility compared to the USD when discussing business.
Yeah, and that's one of the hardest questions to answer. Bitcoin is volatile. It moves, 5% up and down at a time. The general trend over the last decade has clearly been up, but it does have a fairly high level of volatility. So, from a business standpoint, depending on what you're using Bitcoin for, if you're using it as a currency, you probably want to take your Bitcoin and convert it to US dollars, which means you need to have one of those on-off ramps, which reduces the volatility window from however long it takes you to convert from Bitcoin to USD. Long term though, I think the price of Bitcoin has gone up pretty continuously over time. So I don't think there's anything wrong in holding it either. The other point I'll make, and this is, I haven't spent quite enough time researching this, but what's happened over the last year is the institutional engagement with Bitcoin from a futures market, from hedging to speculators, appears to be reducing the beta because you get much more sophisticated tooling that comes in that reduces the arbitrage. For one, that arbitrage used to be a real way you could play Bitcoin. That's largely gone away. But now that there's Bitcoin futures and the ability to hedge Bitcoin, I think that you'll see the beta, the volatility, start to continue to go down. Although I think the long trend is still up. That was a good question. I like that one.
We also had a question on Lightning's revenue model.
That's really a great question. right now, there's no model built in for people to run a Lightning server except to be able to accept Lightning payments, which the people that are behind Lightning believe will be enough. And certainly from our standpoint, from Flashstarts standpoint, there's plenty of incentives to run a Lightning network because, for example, many of you may know we closed StartMart this month, partly because of the coronavirus, partly because our lease was up, and we're selling our furniture. So if you're interested in furniture, we have that. But we're taking payments in Bitcoin and Lightning, so it's been really fun to see that use case play out. Um, Here's a quick poll, which is very similar to the questions about the technology. So just take a quick second and go through here and answer what you'd like to hear more about. And I'll try to put that at the end. I want to make sure we get through this, though. I'll leave that up there for a little while. And you can continue to answer it. Here is the, I want to go to the next slide. So business models. Payments over the Bitcoin network, business to business. That's a pretty big use case right now, particularly the point three, which is transnational transactions, where you pay suppliers in foreign countries. Bitcoin goes there more easily than any other mechanism, and then B2C payments both over Bitcoin and over the Lightning Network. So consumers buying things. I think the companies, and you'll see this on the next slide, but the companies that have said we accept Bitcoin have not seen a huge upswell yet in the percentage of their transactions over Bitcoin or Lightning, but it's great PR. So from the both learning about Bitcoin right now, as well as getting the early stage PR of your company is hip and innovative, that value proposition is only going down as more and more companies start to accept Bitcoin and Lightning as payments. Replacing the SWIFT, if you've ever done international uh, transactions using SWIFT, it is fraught with delays and challenges. And if you ever want to read some funny stuff, read about how Swift was built. It's quite the hodgepodge Rubik's Cube or collection of interesting technologies cobbled together. Programmable money is, I think, the most interesting one. You can build infrastructure where you have software that does X, Y, and Z, and also includes payments by integrating that software with Bitcoin and or Lightning. That's never been easily possible before, and now it suddenly is incredibly easy. As a currency hedge, I think that's been as governments around the world have poured fiat currencies into their economies to keep them afloat. There's been a lot of talk and interest in using Bitcoin as a hedge against some of possibly future inflation. And then decentralized finance, there are a series of companies that have already turned profitable by using Bitcoin and blockchain to provide decentralized finance, where they use Bitcoin as a way to both let people get interest and get loans. There's a company called BlockFi, which is probably the best example of that. Case studies. I'd hope to have more formal case studies, but that didn't really happen. It's still very early. The top one in a B2C side is Square, which is Jack Dorsey's company. He also is the CEO of Twitter, and their Cash App, which is like Venmo or any of the other wallet-based apps, also accepts Bitcoin, and they saw a 400% increase year over year in the use of Bitcoin in their Cash App, and it's actually turned nice profit for them. The rest of these companies, Overstock, Wikipedia, through Burger King, have largely done it for the PR value, saying, "Hey, we accept Bitcoin or Lightning," and I think they've garnered some good PR from that. And BitPay, I already mentioned, as a processor for corporations that want to quickly and not worry about a way to accept payments in Bitcoin. They have over 2 million businesses that use BitPay worldwide. On the business to business side, I already mentioned the Tudor hedge fund. Paul Tudor's using it as a inflationary hedge. More recently, he announced he put 1% of his hedge fund into blockchain or Bitcoin. Avnet, which has got a somewhat under the covers integration between blockchain and Bitcoin, which I thought was very interesting. And then Bellatora is a company that engages with a lot of emerging market suppliers, and they're using it as a much more efficient way to make payments to their suppliers in emerging markets. So, best practices. The first thing you need to do is designate a product champion within your organization, and then going back to the flashline levels of technology adoption, start your educational process by having your organization authorize educational resources so developers and managers can start to learn more, attend seminars or get some classes or go to conferences if we ever get them back to learn more about Bitcoin and blockchain. And then put in place a way to formally track new developments. This is a very rapidly growing space, and staying on top of what's new is important for both what to experiment with and what you need to learn. And then launch some experimental pilot projects. These are low risk, easy to do, and start you up that educational curve. So the first thing you should do is install a blockchain server, install a Lightning server, and then get at least one wallet. As I mentioned earlier, the fifth best practice is to establish a fiat on off ramp, because that's the way you can acquire some Bitcoin and convert your Bitcoin to the currency of your choice. It needs to be centrally managed. And this, I'm surprised more people don't talk about this, but it's money. Uh, if you if your organization gets involved with Bitcoin, it needs to be managed by the CFO. And why everybody doesn't do that is beyond me, but it's clearly money and it should be under the auspices of your chief financial officer. In that same vein, you need to establish governance standards and practices, implement multi-sig, which for large transactions is nothing more than two people signing a transaction. So just like you might with a big check, you might require two signatures on a paper check. Bitcoin supports multiple signatures on a transaction. You probably want to establish a governance protocol for that. Track transactions. Take a look at the IRS Notice 2014-21, which tells you what you need to know from an accounting standpoint when you engage with Bitcoin transactions. And then I think utilizing multiple wallets and addresses should become part of your governance chain. And we're working on developing a Flashstarts governance standards document. We should be there probably in June. That incorporates what we believe to be the best practices around Bitcoin governance within your CFO office. And one of those things is clearly going to be creating and using multiple wallets and addresses for different purposes. Not everybody does that. There's some significant benefits. So those are the top 10 best practices. And so to kind of wrap up here, you need to get started today. Go small, go slow. I don't think you need to get started right away, but you don't need to go that fast. And continuously look for pilot opportunities. The takeaway is get started, put the infrastructure in place. So when some division of yours comes and says, "Hey, I got somebody who wants to pay in Bitcoin," you can say, "Okay, we're ready." And that's where Flashstarts can help. As I mentioned earlier, we're a consultancy. If you need any help on setting any of this stuff up, or you have special needs, we'd be happy to talk to you. So questions, go to lightning.network at flashstarts.com. We provide coaching and consulting. You can go to our microsite, which is all about Bitcoin and Lightning, or we're creating which is where we create a co-learning community because we're all really learning about this together. It changes so fast that it really helps to have lots of people learning at the same time.